Hey guys, what's going on? This is a cool video about apartment buildings. If you've ever thought about buying one, you should definitely check it out. An apartment building is slightly different than buying residential real estate in the sense that the lender looks at the income that's coming from the property to determine how much money they would be willing to give you for a loan. It's kind of a unique situation. You always want to look at something called a cap rate, which is capitalization rate, a rate of return over an extended period of time. And that generally goes by area. As an example, in LA, generally give you a return on your investment anywhere between 3 to 4%. That's pretty low. However, because the market's been appreciating so strong over the past 10 years or so, the building that you bought 10 years ago is probably worth at least double or more what you paid for it, makes up for the return on your investment. 100 unit building that generates about $2,500 per door generates about $250,000 in income. Now, that would be a massive building. So you're driving down the street, you see this huge building that's about 100 doors, and you're like, oh my God, I wonder how much something like that would be worth. It's actually very simple to figure out. Check it out. So you have 100 doors, each door gives you $2,500, right? So that's $250,000 a month. Massive money, all right? Now, I can tell you two things. One, a lender underwrites to 5% vacancy. Now, the place may be completely full and there may be a waiting list for people trying to get in. However, the lender still wants to make sure that if there's vacancies, they're covered. So at least 5%. If it's more than that, they're gonna underwrite to more than that, but let's call it 5%. Then you're getting into the expenses, okay? Into the expenses of, so now we know the income, we know there's a vacancy factor. Now you go into the expenses. Now, there's more than that, but I'm just gonna cut it short, okay? Generally speaking, most buildings operate around 30 to 40% expense factor, and that's pretty healthy for an apartment building that's likely built somewhere between, around the 80s or so. There could be buildings that are operating at a less expense factor because they're super new, but we're just gonna use an average building. Now, they're also going to assume that there's a 5% management fee. You may be self-managing the place and you might be phenomenal at it, but the next person who's gonna take it is gonna need a management company. So they're always gonna assume at least 5% for management, and let's just call it 30% for expenses. So if I took this $250,000 a month income and I removed the vacancy and expenses, likely I'm gonna be somewhere around $150,000 a month. And that's going to be called the net operating income. You probably heard that before, NOI. And that actually tells me how much does the property bring in every single month. So this massive 100 unit building that I just drove by that brings in $250,000 a month, brings in $150 after the management, vacancy, and expenses. So $150,000 a month times 12, that's $1.8 million a year, okay? Massive. Now, if I'm thinking that this building's bringing in $1.8 million a year and the return on the investment is 4%, I'm actually going to look at $1.8 million and say, okay, $1.8 million is 4% of what number? Well, so that's $45 million. That means that building that's 100 doors, that has $2,500 rent per door, that generates $150,000 a month and $1.8 million a year is actually worth, at a 4 cap, 4% of $45 million is $1.8 million. So that means it's worth $45 million. Was that simple? It's kind of like that little formula triangle that we learned in middle school, that you take, one number and then you multiply it by this number and you divide it by that number to get the answer. It's kind of like that. So anyways, now we know the building is worth $45 million, okay? However, there's another trick to the equation. Are you ready for this? We said that after expenses, the NOI was $150,000 a month. So $150,000 represents 125%. Why? Because remember when I started the video, I told you guys that apartment buildings, multifamily, the loans are based off of income? And that's called debt coverage ratio. Simply means that the lender wants to see that the building generates 25% more income than expenses. It's really that simple. So if 150,000 represents 125%, again, going back to that formula we learned in middle school, 150 over 125, we want to find 100%, so we multiply 150 times 100 divided by 125. That gives us $120,000. $120,000. $120,000 would be the maximum monthly payment for a mortgage that this type of a building can sustain, which actually translates to $24 million. Okay, because if you ever want to find a payment on something, you simply remove 2 zeros and you divide it in 2, and then it's somewhere around 4.5% range. That just gives you a framework. So if I'm looking at $120,000 for a payment, I know that can support about $24 million. For a building that's worth $45 million, that means that if you're buying a building like that in LA, massive building, you're coming in with at least close to 50% in a down payment. Now, there's one other thing I want to mention. That's cash flow value, my friends. There's 2 other values. The other value is reconstruction. Imagine this puppy burns down. We need to know how much it's going to be to rebuild it. That will come in an appraisal form. The last one is comp value. What are other things in the area selling for, okay? So hopefully that kind of puts in perspective to you, if you were to drive by an apartment building today, and you know that return on investment is about 4%, you can figure out how many doors there are, figure out what it makes every year, and then you could simply, use 4% as a cap rate, back into the value, just like I showed you guys, and there you go, right? You could even figure out the payment and how much of a mortgage you can get. If it's LA, just use 50% and you're good to go. Guys, I appreciate you guys watching this, as always, and if you like it, please give it a big thumbs up, subscribe to my channel. If you have any questions, please, I welcome you. Put them in the comments below. I will be happy to answer them. And as always, I appreciate you guys watching, and I'll catch you on the next video.